The man who changed the world. What if I told you that one of the richest people in history didn't start with $1 billion idea? He started with a computer that most people had never even seen. Before the private jets. Before the billions of dollars. Before becoming one of the most powerful figures in technology. Bill Gates was just a teenager spending countless hours in front of a machine, convinced that computers would one day change the world. At a time when most people saw computers as massive, expensive machines reserved for governments and corporations, Bill Gates saw something different. He saw the future. But his journey to becoming one of the wealthiest people on Earth wasn't built on luck alone. It was built on obsession. On taking risks when nobody believed in him. On making decisions that seemed impossible at the time. From dropping out of Harvard to building Microsoft. From a small software company to a global empire. Bill Gates didn't just become rich. He helped create the digital world we live in today. But how did a young programmer from Seattle build one of the most valuable companies in history? And what lessons can we learn from the decisions that made him a billionaire? This is the story of how Bill Gates became rich. The boy who couldn't stop learning. Most people assume Bill Gates became rich because he had a brilliant business idea. But the truth is, his greatest advantage wasn't money. It was obsession. Bill Gates was born on October 28, 1955, in Seattle, Washington, into a family that valued education, discipline, and ambition. His father was a successful attorney, and his mother served on the boards of several major organizations. They expected excellence, but no one could have predicted just how extraordinary their son would become. As a child, Bill was intensely curious. He didn't simply ask questions, he needed to know how everything worked. He devoured books, solved complex puzzles for fun, and constantly challenged himself. While many kids his age were outside playing sports, Bill could spend hours reading encyclopedias or thinking through difficult logic problems. Teachers quickly realized he learned much faster than most students. Sometimes, he even became bored in class because he finished assignments long before everyone else. That curiosity would soon lead him to something that almost nobody else in the world had access to. Computers. In 1968, Bill enrolled at Lakeside School, one of the few schools in America that had access to a computer terminal. At the time, computers weren't sleek laptops or smartphones. They were enormous, expensive machines that filled entire rooms, and very few people knew how to use them. The moment Bill touched a keyboard, something clicked. Programming wasn't just interesting to him. It became an obsession. He spent every spare minute learning how computers worked, writing code, making mistakes, and teaching himself how to solve increasingly difficult problems. Soon, he wasn't just using the computer. He understood it better than many adults. Bill and a small group of equally passionate students would stay late into the night experimenting with software, testing ideas, and pushing the machines to their limits. Sometimes they even found bugs in the computer system just so they could earn more free computer time. While most teenagers were thinking about weekend plans, Bill Gates was thinking about algorithms. Thousands of hours of practice accumulated before he had even graduated high school. Without realizing it, he was building a skill that would soon become one of the most valuable in the world. But there was another student at Lakeside who shared the same passion. His name was Paul Allen. He was older than Bill, equally fascinated by computers, and just as convinced that software would change the future. Their friendship wasn't built around sports or popularity. It was built around a shared belief that computers were going to transform the world. Neither of them knew it yet. But together, they were about to build one of the most powerful companies in history. The opportunity that changed everything. By the early 1970s, Bill Gates and Paul Allen had become inseparable. Whenever they weren't in school, they were writing code, studying computer systems, or talking about the future of technology. Most people saw computers as giant machines that only governments and large corporations could afford. Bill and Paul saw something completely different. They believed that one day, every person would own a computer. At the time, that idea sounded ridiculous. The average family had never even seen a computer, let alone imagine owning one. But in January of 1975, everything changed. Paul Allen was walking through a newsstand when one magazine instantly caught his attention. On the cover was a machine called the Altair 8800. It was one of the world's first personal computers, a kit that hobbyists could assemble themselves. To most people, it looked like a strange metal box. To Bill and Paul, it looked like the future. There was just one problem. The Altair had hardware, but it had almost no software. Without software, it was practically useless. That's when Bill Gates made one of the boldest decisions of his life. He called the company that built the Altair and confidently told them that he and Paul had already created a programming language for their computer. There was only one small problem. They hadn't. Not a single line of code had been written. It was a massive gamble. If they failed, they would destroy their credibility before their careers had even begun. But Bill believed something that would define the rest of his life. Sometimes opportunities don't wait until you're ready. You have to become ready after saying yes. The company agreed to give them a chance. Now the clock was ticking. Bill and Paul worked almost non-stop. Days blended into nights. They barely slept. Every hour was spent writing code, fixing bugs, and testing their program without even having the actual Altair computer in front of them. Failure wasn't an option. Weeks later, Paul boarded a plane carrying their software to demonstrate it. Everything depended on that single presentation. If the program crashed, their dream would be over before it even started. As Paul loaded the software and began the demonstration, the room fell silent. Then, it worked. Perfectly. The Altair successfully ran the program they had created. The company was stunned. What had started as an enormous risk had turned into an incredible opportunity. Soon after, Bill Gates made another decision that shocked almost everyone around him. He left Harvard University. Many believed he was throwing away his future. But Bill believed he had found something bigger than a college degree. Together with Paul Allen, he officially founded a company they called Microsoft. They had no investors, no massive office, no guarantee of success. Just two young men with an idea that the rest of the world hadn't believed. And they were about to change the technology. The deal that made Microsoft. In 1980, Microsoft was still a relatively small company. Bill Gates had earned a reputation as a brilliant programmer, but he wasn't a billionaire. Then, one phone call changed everything. IBM, the largest computer company, was preparing to launch its first personal computer. For decades, IBM had dominated the business computing industry. Now, it wanted to enter the consumer market before its competitors could. But there was a problem. IBM had the hardware. It didn't have an operating system. Without one, its new computer couldn't function. The company began searching for someone who could provide the software they needed. Eventually, they knocked on Microsoft's door. For most companies, this would have been an impossible opportunity. IBM was a giant. Microsoft was a startup with only a handful of employees. But Bill Gates saw something that almost nobody else did. This wasn't just another business deal. It was a chance to shape the future of personal computing. There was one major obstacle. Microsoft didn't actually own the operating system IBM needed. Most people would have walked away. Bill Gates did the opposite. He confidently accepted the challenge. Then he set out to find the missing piece. After searching for a solution, Microsoft acquired an operating system created by another software developer. Bill and his team quickly adapted and improved it to meet IBM's needs, transforming it into what became known as MS-DOS. The agreement that followed would become one of the smartest business decisions in history. IBM expected to sell computers. Bill Gates expected the entire personal computer industry to explode. Instead of giving IBM exclusive ownership of MS-DOS, Microsoft negotiated a licensing agreement. That single decision changed everything. Every time another computer manufacturer wanted to use Microsoft's operating system, they had to pay Microsoft. As companies like Compaq, Dell, and countless others began building IBM-compatible computers, Microsoft's software spread across the world. While hardware companies competed with each other, Microsoft kept collecting licensing revenue. The more computers that were sold, the more Microsoft grew. It was a business model that generated billions of dollars over the following decades. And Bill Gates had positioned his company at the center of it all. By the mid-1980s, Microsoft was no longer a small software company. It had become one of the fastest-growing businesses on the planet. But Bill Gates wasn't satisfied. He believed computers could become even easier for ordinary people to use. Typing complicated commands into a black screen wasn't the future. He envisioned a computer that anyone could learn to use. A computer controlled with simple windows, icons, and a mouse. Many people doubted the idea. Bill Gates didn't. The next product Microsoft released would not only redefine the company, it would redefine personal computing itself. It was called Windows. Windows conquers the world. By the mid-1980s, Microsoft had already changed the computer industry with MS-DOS, but Bill Gates believed the company's biggest achievement was still ahead. At the time, computers were becoming more powerful, yet they remained difficult for the average person to use. Most tasks required typing complex commands, and even a small mistake could leave users staring at an error message. Gates believed computers would never reach their full potential unless they became simple enough for everyone. In 1985, Microsoft introduced the first version of Windows, a graphical interface designed to make computers easier to navigate with windows, icons, and a mouse. The launch wasn't an instant success. Critics called it slow, and many businesses preferred to stick with the familiar command line systems they already knew. But instead of giving up, Microsoft continued improving Windows with every new release, making it faster, more reliable, and more user-friendly. As personal computers became common in homes, schools, and offices during the late 1980s and early 1990s, Windows steadily gained momentum. More software developers began creating applications specifically for Microsoft's platform, attracting even more users. It became a powerful cycle. The more people used Windows, the more valuable it became. Then came the moment that changed everything. In August 1995, Microsoft launched Windows 95, one of the most anticipated software releases in history. Stores opened at midnight, customers lined up for hours, and news outlets treated the launch like a major national event. For millions of people, Windows 95 was their first truly modern computing experience. Features like the Start button, the taskbar, and an improved graphical interface made personal computers easier to use than ever before. The operating system became an enormous success, selling millions of copies within weeks. Businesses standardized on Windows, schools taught students using Windows computers, and developers built their software around Microsoft's platform. Before long, Windows had become the operating system that defined personal computing across much of the world. Microsoft's incredible growth turned the company into one of the most valuable businesses on earth. Its stock price soared, thousands of employees became millionaires, and Bill Gates became the richest person in the world. But with that success came increasing scrutiny. Competitors argued that Microsoft had become too powerful, and governments began investigating whether the company was using its dominance unfairly. The empire Bill Gates had spent 2 decades building was about to face its greatest challenge yet. Many competitors argued that Microsoft's dominance was becoming unfair. They claimed that because Windows was installed on most personal computers, Microsoft had too much control over the entire technology industry. One of the biggest arguments was about how Microsoft included its own programs with Windows, especially its Internet browser, Internet Explorer. Competitors believed Microsoft was using the power of Windows to push out other companies and prevent them from competing fairly. The government began investigating Microsoft, accusing the company of using its position as the leading operating system provider to limit competition. Bill Gates defended Microsoft's actions. He argued that the company was not trying to eliminate competition, but instead was improving Windows by adding new features that made the experience better for users. According to Gates, combining different technologies into Windows was part of innovation. He believed that customers benefited because computers became easier, faster, and more powerful. The legal battle became one of the biggest technology cases in history. Microsoft's future was uncertain, but the company continued developing new versions of Windows. Instead of stopping innovation, Microsoft focused on making its products better and maintaining its position as the leader of the software industry. In the end, the case changed how people viewed Microsoft. Some saw Bill Gates as a visionary who built one of the most important companies in history. Others saw Microsoft as a company that had become too powerful. But one thing was undeniable: Windows had changed the world, and Microsoft's influence on technology was impossible to ignore. A legacy beyond wealth. By the early 2000s, Bill Gates had built one of the most influential companies in history. Microsoft had helped bring personal computers into millions of homes, schools, and businesses around the world, and Gates had become the richest person on Earth. Most people expected him to spend the rest of his life growing Microsoft. Instead, he chose a different path. In 2000, Gates stepped down as Microsoft's CEO and began focusing more on philanthropy through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The foundation invested billions of dollars into global health, education, vaccine research, and fighting poverty, with the goal of creating lasting solutions rather than temporary fixes. Even after leaving Microsoft's day-to-day operations, Gates continued investing in new technologies, supporting clean energy research, and writing about the challenges shaping the future. Today, opinions about Bill Gates differ. Some admire him as one of history's greatest entrepreneurs, while others criticize some of his decisions. But one thing is difficult to deny: his impact on technology and on the world has been enormous. From a teenager fascinated by computers, to the co-founder of Microsoft, to one of the world's leading philanthropists, Bill Gates' story isn't just about becoming rich. It's about recognizing opportunities, adapting to change, and using success to create a lasting impact. Because in the end, the greatest legacy isn't how much wealth you build. It's what you choose to do with it. The lessons behind the billionaire. Bill Gates' story is often told as a story about money. A teenager from Seattle who became one of the richest people in history. A programmer who built a company worth trillions of dollars. A businessman who changed the way the world interacts with technology. But the real story goes deeper. Because Bill Gates didn't become successful simply because he was intelligent. The world is full of intelligent people. What separated him was his ability to combine curiosity, discipline, and the courage to act when opportunities appeared. As a teenager, he wasn't waiting for the perfect moment. He was learning. While others saw computers as machines reserved for experts, he saw a future where technology could become part of everyday life. When the opportunity with the Altair computer appeared, he didn't have everything figured out. He took the risk and learned along the way. When Microsoft was still a small company, he didn't think only about the present. He thought about where the world was heading. And when he reached the top, he didn't simply ask, "How can I make more money?" He asked, "What can I do with what I've built?" That mindset is what makes his journey so fascinating. The biggest lesson from Bill Gates is not about becoming a billionaire. It's about developing skills before the world recognizes their value. It's about being obsessed with learning. It's about understanding that every major achievement begins with a small idea that most people don't believe in yet. Because every successful person starts somewhere. Before Microsoft became a global giant, it was just two young people writing code in a small room. Before Bill Gates became a household name, he was simply a teenager fascinated by computers. The difference was that he kept learning. He kept improving. And he kept believing in a future that didn't exist yet. Bill Gates' journey shows us that success is rarely an overnight event. It is the result of years of preparation, thousands of decisions, and the willingness to keep moving forward when the outcome is uncertain. The next great idea. The next revolutionary company. The next person who changes the world. Could be created by someone who is learning today. Because every empire begins with a single idea. And every extraordinary story begins with someone who chooses to pursue it. This was the story of how Bill Gates became rich. But more importantly, this was the story of how one person's curiosity helped change the world. Welcome to the Lux Origins.